you enjoyed as a guest of the U.S. Army,
Oh, well,
Air Force?
the food and treatment was generally good. Of course, it was just normal military food in mess halls until we got to, like, Iwo Jima. When my group went on Iwo Jima, we, as I say, we went somewhere early before before they had captured the rest of the island. We lived in foxholes for a few days. You don't usually think of Air Force pilots living in the foxholes. They generally speak of as having barracks and stuff. But we lived in foxholes for a few days until they got tents and stuff for us.
Well, you that the tent was about half the big of this room. What, hell, 8 of us, I guess?
And it's called a pyramidal tent. It was in the shape of a pyramid.
And then they put up a Quonset hut.
And later we had Quonset huts.
And then the mess hall, you speak of food, was down there, and we'd steal the food out of the mess hall at night to, stuff. And I remember the mess hall folks pulled up in there one night to stop us, and they were on to us. And we had taken these, you'd have a canister, a bomb, wouldn't be a bomb, but that would put out a yellow smoke. It was in your dinghy in case we took those bombs out of the kits and activated them and threw them inside the mess hall place there. And the next thing you knew, at the night, was all this yellow smoke was billowing out of the windows. But that brought a lot of attention, and nobody owned up to it. But I mean, once in a while we'd get some meat. You'd be sitting around the mess hall in the tables there, and some of the guys, and these big old green flies. They were dead Japs all around. You'd see them, and we liked that steak, once in a while. And we'd see a green fly land on the guy's plate there with his meat. And we'd say, "That's the same fly that was eating on that Jap up there," And after a while, the guy would turn. Some of the weaker stomach ones would kind of get a little sick and leave, and we'd go and spear his meat and eat it.
We generally had good quarters and housing, though.
Yeah, the Quonset huts, and then we'd get a ration of liquor.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd take a bottle of liquor, and those that didn't drink liquor, I'd swap it to the CBs for 3 cases of Coca-Colas. There's 36 Cokes a case, and then I'd swap a case and a half or 2 cases of Cokes for a bottle of liquor, and then I'd sell the liquor, and then we'd trade in beer. And when I left, I had about $2,000 worth of liquor in the Quonset hut, and I said, "Fellas, that's all yours. I'm going home." I went home in probably September, October of '45. Got a chance. They sent me home. Like I said, Jack said, I ended up in Frisco, getting home best way I could.
Well, Mr. Redwine, would you go on and tell me a little bit about returning home and the rest of your career?
Well, when I got home, my mother had been saving for me. Getting the States, and I said, "I've been on a warrior eating that stuff for 3 weeks waiting for a plane out." I said, "You can eat it yourself." But I got home and applied to Yale University, went to the University of Georgia until I got home in January of '46 and went to university, and then started out at Yale for my last 2 years. Ended up graduating from Yale. Went to work for Dun & Bradstreet in Atlanta for 2 years. Came back here in 1950. In 10 years, I was in the insurance and real estate business. Sold it out and worked for the Athens Federal, which is the Athens First Bank and Trust. Retired about, it's been 5 years ago I retired as the executive vice president. And am now completely, I was stayed on the board until I was in. Now I'm completely retired. And I can speak my piece.
And would you tell
Nobody but my wife will raise hell about it.
Well, I wanted to ask about your family. Would you tell me about your wife and kids?
I got a wife and I got 2 children. Roby, who's with J.C. Bradford here, and Ginger's over in Atlanta with an outfit called Executrain.
And your wife's maiden name? Would you tell me?
Bonner. She was Mary Juliet Bonner. Lived here in Athens on Lumpkin Street. And I met her, 35 years ago or something, 40 years ago, maybe. Yeah, 40. Maybe a little more longer than that. But anyway, we got married. Been married some 35, 36 years.
What you been doing in your retirement? I read you in the newspaper now.
Yeah, well, I write the article in the newspaper and stay busy doing nothing. Go by the stock markets, check on the stocks. Got a garden, interested in Civil War history, 2 of the battlefields.
Which battlefields have you been to? Which ones have you enjoyed the most?
Well, my great-grandfather, William Parks Redwine, was in the 10th Georgia of Sam's Brigade, McLaws Division, Longstreet Corps, and on my mother's side, Uncle Lucas Lampkin is buried over here on Jackson Street on the University of Georgia property or whatever. And he was in Cobb's Legion. He was in Wofford's Brigade in McLaws Division, I believe it was, Longstreet's. And both of them serviced together. And I knew just Jack and I were on Iwo Jima, never knew it, and I doubt if they ever knew it, but they were in the same outfits in the same battles. I've been to Gettysburg several times, Chickamauga, Kennesaw, Vicksburg, Antietam. Antietam's a great place to see, and of course Gettysburg, and the crater there at Petersburg. I've been to all of the, where haven't I been, I guess.
Well, let me ask a little bit, let me back way up and ask you both about growing up. And since I've still got your clip there, I'd like to ask you first about growing up in that generation, and that coming Depression generation. Can you tell me something of your parents and what you remember of those years?
Well, my mother's background is here in Athens, Georgia. She was a West. The Lampkins, the Athens Observer there on Lumpkin Street is in where my great-grandfather Louis Lampkin owned the building, and his granddaughter Lucy Lampkin Hammerstrom still owns that building. That was my mother's background. My father was from Fayetteville, Georgia, and Fayette County, and he was in the insurance business. And I remember growing up, going to Barra School. I remember that sometimes having to put some cardboard in the bottom of my shoes, a little late getting them resoled, but you could resole your shoes, go down to Cress's, and for a dime get a little rubber soles and do the work at home. And I've lived in 5 Points. I was in Athens all my life. I mean, one spot or another.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
Have a half brother and a half sister. Brother's deceased. He was out in New Mexico, and my sister lives in Milton, Wisconsin, and will be 86 this fall.
Let me clip this to Mr. Thornton, because I'd like to hear what he remembers of the Depression and his family at that time. And may I ask you the same question?
Well, I might point out, Mr. I was talking about didn't get his shoes half soled. He wasn't in poverty. His family was of the affluent they were affluent at that time.
Affluence is comparative.
I understand that. It's all relative. But there were plenty of people a hell of a lot worse off than he was, and than I was too at that time. I grew up in Oglethorpe County. My father was a rural mail carrier from a little town down there called Point Peter, Georgia, which is no longer in existence, and it's generally known as the Glade, which is a community. And had a regular salary, so we were starving, although we were poor. No question about that when I grew up. But there were a lot of folks worse off than we were that were farmers and things of that nature. But we moved to Winterville when I was 12 years old. My father transferred to the Hull Rail Route, mainly because he thought it would be much better for us children, and there were 6 of us, to come to Winterville School or to be in a better area than way down the boondocks of Oglethorpe County. No reflection on Oglethorpe County. They got some great history down there. Some great people from Oglethorpe County. But we moved to Winterville when I was 12 years old in 1935, and I finished high school at Winterville. So there were 6 of us in my family, and my father died fairly early at age 62. But the Depression was hard, but there were a lot of people worse than we were, although we were not rich by any means. Don't misunderstand me. My father had a regular salary, which was the main thing.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have two sisters, one of whom is deceased, and there were 4 sons. There were 6 of us in all. And my oldest sister and my oldest brother are deceased. There's still 4 of us, and we have a reunion every year. We're having it in Dillard, Georgia, in September, with all the children and grandchildren.
Were either of your brothers and sisters in the service and care to?
My oldest brother was in the Navy in World War II and also in the Korean War, but my other brothers were too young for World War II. My oldest sister, Mary, who was next in age to my oldest brother, was active in the war, though she was not in the military. She was a pioneer control tower operator, a civilian employee for the FAA, and her husband was regular Air Force. He was a career Air Force man.
Would she have continued in that career after the war, or was she one of those working women who only worked during the war?
No, she just worked, and after she and Mac got married, and they traveled all. He was a career Air Force officer. He was a lieutenant colonel. He was incidentally was in the old Eagle Squadron in England in the early part of before America was in World War II. But he was a career Air Force. So was my other sister's husband, who's still living, Bruce Davis, who's a career Air Force. He was in the bombers.
Can you describe to me some of the look of the countryside in those days, the Hull and Winterville area over there?
Well, it was mostly row cropping. There was corn, cotton, wheat fields, oats, rye. There was not any real intensive farming as we have nowadays. And I've chopped some cotton in my life and dropped soda on corn, which is a mean job. But the countryside is a lot different now from what it was then, to be sure.
Were there black families as well as white in that area? I've been to New Grove Baptist Church these days, and of course that's a new building on what used to be a black church. I'm just trying to reach for landmarks.
Is New Grove out there at Winterville?
That's on the corner of Old Elm and close to the DuPont plant.
I'm just trying to reach for some landmarks that may have been there at the time.
It was the church was. It's been rebuilt recently. That church has been there since I can remember. But there were a few black families in the Winterville area, not many. There were a few.
The fields. I know that there's even that Nakamichi factory at that intersection. But were there primarily small farms, and who was farming?
I'd say most of them were fairly small farms. There were a few that had, like Mr. Edgar Wood, the land for that Jap factory you mentioned. They had a rather large dairy farm right in that area. And cattle had not become the prominent farming operation that it is now. Then it was mostly row cropping, cotton, corn.
I guess prior to us coming along, it was all cotton.
Yeah, it was, mostly cotton.
Cotton from Augusta to Rome, Georgia.
Yeah.
When did cotton go out? Was that in your childhood or during the war years?
Cotton went out, for the most part, when the advent of the boll wheel, which was in, what, 1920 some odd?
I think of that as 29, but I might be
No,
wrong.
that
29 was the
boll
market.
weevil came through right after, say it reached here about 1921 or 2. But cotton really was out of business under Eisenhower's time. What was it, the name? The soil bank?
Soil bank.
You could take your allotment and put it into the soil bank, plant trees, and
The government would pay you more not to grow cotton than you could make growing cotton.
but cotton, I I remember after World War, cotton went out after the time of World War II in the late 40s. It was on the wane. You remember cotton? You remember the cotton bales stacked all over Athens in the fall?
Yeah, I've
All
chopped
over
cotton.
Athens. Would that have been in the warehouse district or?
Yeah, all over Athens. I mean, beginning down there, where Firestone place is. Cotton would be on both sides of Broad Street from Firestone all the way down to the Oconee River where Weaver D's is, back at Farmer's Highway.
Of course, there was a big cotton warehouse out on what is now Oneida Street, too.
Yeah, that was a warehouse.
But of course, cotton, the price of cotton got to 10, 12 cents a pound, and then a little later on, the man-made fibers took over from the cotton. And now I guess we're going back to cotton.
Well, we certainly see some fields over in Oconee County right now.
It's 60 cents a pound now.
Yeah,
About it.
but the man-made fibers, nylon, and those things really put cotton out of business, I guess.
Can you all describe for me trains and some of the way gentlemen used to travel in those days? Some of the, trying to get a feel for.
Well, I got on the train in the war. I got on the train to go to Iwo Jima now. I got on, well, I didn't know where I was going to go to Hawaii. Got on the train at Tallahassee and went to Chicago and all the way across to Seattle. We had a special Pullman car. And used to travel on the train when I went to all the VMI. You get on that, from Athens you could get on the Silver Media and get on there in the evening and be in Washington the next morning at 8 o'clock and then on up to New Haven and be there late that afternoon and reverse that.
Train was the preferred mode of travel for long distances at that time, I suppose. I never did that much traveling. And later on, buses, Greyhound bus company was a way to get from point A to point B. But I never did that much traveling. But trains were the main way to go on the long distances, I'm sure.
The bus, I remember riding the bus to Atlanta, you get a ticket and they would stop. I mean, you'd have some that wouldn't stop, but they'd stop along the way. And I remember the bus ticket would have on that split silk in between, going by way of Monroe, Athens to whatever, then Monroe, split silk between Loganville, Belleville, and then stop and pick up passengers. Of course, the economics now and the automobile put the buses out of business just about.
Of course, there was a passenger train to Athens up until what, in the late 60s?
Yeah, I guess in the
Silver-
60s.
the Silver Meteor.
Comet and the Silver Meteor.
Yeah.
The Seaboard. Of course, in Athens, I rode from Lulu to Athens on that special train they had the other day, the excursion. Had a good time.
Oh, I'm jealous. I wish I could have gone. How old were you gentlemen when you recall owning a car? I mean, that must have been a huge deal.
Oh, I never owned a car until I got back from World War II. I bought a Model A Ford for $275 to commute from my home, my folks' home out at Hull to University of Georgia when I was going to school. That's the first car I ever owned that I owned outright.
After the war.
Yeah, it was after the war.
And it was a
Right.
Model A.
It was a Model A Ford. I wish I had it now. It was a 1930 Model A Ford sedan. We called it halitosis because it smelled so bad. All this stuff. Ruth and I courted in that car.
I had a 36 Hudson. Wouldn't stay in second gear. I came back from the service and bought it. I looked around and they had a ceiling on what you'd get for a car. And I remember went out there to Bishop, Georgia. A lady had a car sale and I was going to buy it from her. And it was a good DAR friend of my mother's, and I thought, well, I'd pay her whatever that one price that government had. And she wanted some money under the table. And I was kind of disappointed. I guess I lost a little faith in the DARs. but we had that, and Kenneth Morris and I used to take my mother and Aunt Frances over to Atlanta shopping in that big old Hudson. And we'd put liquor, we'd load up and get liquor in the back, put it in the trunk, put it under the back seat. We had a perfect cover there. My mother and Aunt Frances all costed it up coming back from Atlanta. Didn't realize they were sitting on a couple of cases of booze that Kenneth and I would sell to our friends here in Athens.
Of course, you have to remember at that time, prior to World War II, hardly any young teenagers owned cars. My father had a car which he let me use on Saturday night every other week because I had a friend that could get his daddy's car every other week. But nobody, in Winterville High School, there was only one boy that owned a car. It was W.A. Cooper, which is W.A. Cooper's place out on Lexington Road now. That's the same guy. He owned a 36 Chevrolet. And at Piedmont College, I don't think a student at Piedmont owned a car when I was there in 1940 and 41.
How many students did you graduate with at Winterville High School?